Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have this conversation tonight. So please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. And let us also know what you're doing in your community to enrich your community, to bring change in your community. Thanks again for joining us. Make sure you're joining us in the chat too. Let us know where you're coming from. We already have comments popping off this evening. We have millions of Americans who are very much in favor of freedom and democracy and the Constitution and real elections. Yes, this is true. All right. We have folks from Manassas, Virginia. We have Lexington, Wisconsin. Hello. Big Bear Lake. Hello again, Karen. Great. I'm Connecticut. Excellent, excellent. We're so excited to have you all. Let us know what you're doing to take action in your community and to enrich your community. This could be mutual aid efforts. This could be volunteering for your local animal shelter because we know kitten season is in full swing right now. There are so many things that so many of us do to make our communities better. So let us know what you're doing to enrich and enliven your community. Great. Thanks for joining us from Ashland, Oregon. Falls Church, Virginia. We have a lot of Virginia Washington folks. Hello. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for being in this site. We have folks from the Chicago suburbs encouraging their public servants, attending rallies, speaking up and speaking out. Excellent. I think people grossly underestimate the impact of going to your local city council meetings and school board meetings. If you've ever been to a city council or school board meeting, you realize not a lot of people attend those. And so your voice becomes disproportionately impactful. It makes a really big difference to participate, especially in meetings where there are fewer than 10 people most of the time. Right. 50 plus rallies in defense of democracy, immigrants, reproductive justice, due process, etc. This is fantastic. All right. Protesting and postcarding, writing to my Congress critters ad nauseam. No kidding. It is a never-ending letter writing campaign, isn't it? Yeah, there are so many different issues to reach out to our members of Congress on, and we are really excited to talk about a really high impact issue tonight. Let's see. We're doing rush hour resistance protests in an LGBTQ-friendly neighborhood to show support, and at the ice field office to show not support. Love that. Right. We have Steve. Thank you for joining us from Central Texas. Right, we're helping on issues involving supporting our Constitution, having fair elections. All right. And what are we doing? We are sending protest quilts. That's fantastic. That is such a lovely effort. So something really special that I'd love to bring up is that the pink hats from the original Women's March, those did not come from Women's March. Those came from knitting and crochet communities. They came from fiber art communities. Those hats are a symbol of the ways that different communities come together on their own without us directing them. So when I see something like the national quilt, I think that's really special. Getting involved with Save Our Schools, doing phone banks to get new residents registered to vote. This is fantastic. All right. We have some great ideas and great things happening in our community. So make sure you're checking in with each other in the comments. And while we're on the subject of the comments, just want to let you all know we are heavy-handed on the ban hammer and we do not tolerate abusive behavior in the comments. So if you are spamming the chat, if you are being awful to each other in the chat, and if you are otherwise taking up space in the chat that does not leave room for other people to learn, we will delete your comments and we will block you from commenting. Our comment section is a community space, so please keep it for the community. We do also have some kind of community working agreements, so please feel free to peruse those. In short, operate from a place of curiosity and express curiosity with each other. We don't have to make assumptions about what another person might be thinking. And maybe if we must make assumptions, assume best intent. So feel free to take a look at those working agreements. Tonight, if you need closed captioning, please join us on Facebook. We'll be able to, Facebook has caught up with the tech and is able to provide closed captioning. YouTube has not caught up yet. So again, if you need closed captions, please join us on Facebook. Right. And then of course, last of all links and resources are going to be sent via email to everyone who registered for the call. And this video will live on YouTube after tonight's live stream is over. So if there's anything that you didn't quite catch or that you wanted to watch back again, you'll be able to see it on YouTube. So of course, we want to hear your questions tonight. Make sure to submit your comments in the chat. Generally speaking, we are going to address questions at the end of the evening. So we want to let the conversation really flow, but make sure that you ask your questions because the questions will come at the end. If they are questions like things that we're addressing right now, like, can I rewatch this? What is anybody going to answer my questions? You may see a banner about it, but we're not going to stop the conversation to ask or to answer questions. So just be aware that we want to get to your questions and we will do our best to get there by the end of the night. All right. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. And so I want to get us grounded. And the reason that we are having this conversation tonight, a year ago, we hosted a mass call in the wake of the loss of Sonya Massey. And 10 years ago, we lost Sandra, both to police violence and murder. This is not something that we haven't seen before. And this isn't something that has stopped in the light of protest and the struggle for justice. So we continue to fight. But now, in light of an increased push for policing, mostly in Black and brown cities, we want to have this conversation and continue this conversation because we have to look at the state of our state and the state of state violence. We also want to ensure that we are holding a feminist politic when we are examining the state of police violence, especially in the context of gender and race. So as we look back, we want to frame ourselves and ground ourselves in a feminist lens. And we want to look forward when we consider the interventions that we are working toward. Because our continued repression is facilitated by increased criminalization. So, with that grounding, I am really excited to introduce our guests for the evening, and I'll invite them to introduce themselves and the work that they do, starting with Kayla Gore.
Hi, y'all. I'm Kayla Gore. I live and organize in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm the co-founder of My Sister's House, where we do direct work with Black trans women, trans men, non-binary folks, and also assist people who are unhoused or in unsafe housing conditions. We provide emergency shelter, support people through transition, reentry, and survival. We've built 12 tiny homes to date for people who are often pushed out of every other housing option and housing system in the city and the county. We started the homes with a focus on trans folks, but over time, we made an intentional decision to include cis residents too. Most of our homes are on the same street, and we've had neighbors to call the police on our residents. We've had them be harassed. And then when the police show up, they don't come to protect, they come to make jokes, they come to impose judgment and disrespect. And that creates an unsafe, one sided dynamic with our residents. Where they feel like they automatically have to be on the defensive, which we know what that can end up like. So it's about inclusion, but it's also about strategy, about creating a sustainable community where trans folks are safer and not more exposed. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kayla. Next, we'll meet Dr. Sydney McKinney.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Dr. Sydney McKinney. I'm the Executive Director of the National Black Women's Justice Institute, which is a Black women-led nonprofit working to end the criminalization and incarceration of Black women and girls. Our core strategies are rooted in research, capacity building, and public education. We are very much a research-driven organization, which research I think is my love language, but it's not everyone's. But the reason why we really focus on engaging in research, especially on the criminalization of Black women and girls, is because there's so little data about what happens to Black women and girls who come in contact with police, the courts, and other systems of criminalization. So we're really trying to bring visibility to those who are directly impacted and harmed by these systems, as well as trying to use our research to really drive social change and action in a way that really transforms systems and helps us to create new systems that actually support our communities, which is where the capacity building comes in. So very excited to be here with all of you today.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. McKinney. And finally, we have Andrea Ritchie.
Thanks so much, Risa, and thanks so much to Women's March for putting this together, and to everyone for joining tonight. My name's Andrea Ritchie. I use she pronouns, but I'm fine with any pronouns. And I generally make sure that when I'm introducing myself, I highlight that I am a Black woman, a lesbian, a migrant to the United States who's the daughter of migrants to Canada from Jamaica, and a survivor of both family, interpersonal, and police violence. And I think, and I'm a cisgender woman. And that I say those things because they're not necessarily obvious from looking at me, but also because they deeply inform how I come to this work and who I am in the world. And so I've been, I like to say, documenting, organizing, litigating, advocating, and agitating around police violence against Black women, girls, and trans people, and women, girls, and trans people of color for, it's now coming up on 4 decades. It's really been a long time. And doing that as a survivor of police violence myself, but also as someone who is a feminist, someone who has been deeply involved in reproductive justice movements. And I'll qualify that by saying I'm a Black feminist who's been involved in reproductive justice movements, in economic justice movements, labor movements, environmental justice movements, and movements against the violence of policing and for abolition and transformative justice. So in those capacities, I co-founded the In Our Names Network, which brings us together, your panelists together tonight. We're all members of the network, which is a national network of over 20 organizations and individuals who are organizing and organizing to fight police violence against Black women, girls, and trans people, and to support survivors, both in healing, but also in demanding justice and changing the conditions that produce the violence they experience at the hands of police. And I also co-founded an organization with Mariam Kaba called Interrupting Criminalization, which, the name's not super creative, is focused on interrupting criminalization because, and we formed it in the first iteration of this administration because we believe that criminalization is a core mechanism for how regimes like the current one advance, right-wing, authoritarian, fascist policies, practices, agendas, and ultimately themselves as a regime, and consolidate power. And I think we're seeing that live in this moment in Chicago and DC and Baltimore and Boston and many other places around the country. And so for us, it was really important to interrupt criminalization as a way of interrupting the advance of those kinds of politics and agendas, and to do that through the lens of the experiences, again, of Black women, girls, and trans people, because, well, one, that's who we are. Two, because those experiences do not get centered in conversations around policing, incarceration, detention, deportation, immigration enforcement. No matter how you look at issues of criminalization and policing, it's rare in kind of mainstream conversation that Black women, girls, and trans people are at the center, and we want to put them there because we deserve it, because we experience it, because we're usually the leaders in the fights against it, but also because when we look at policing through the lens of the experiences of Black women, girls, and trans people, we see a larger scope and breadth and depth of how it operates, not just through the police as we tend to understand them and know them, or immigration enforcement, but also, frankly, through every institution in society, from the family policing system to the medical industrial complex to the welfare office to the corner store to your family to your home to when you call for help. So that's who I am, and where I come from, and how I enter into this conversation. And again, I'm super grateful to the Women's March for inviting us to be here today.
Right. Thank you so much, Andrea. So you actually answered our first question because you're all members of the In Our Names Network. So if there's anything you'd like to add, Dr. McKinney or Kayla, on what the network is and why it's important, we'd love to learn more.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Andrea, for really telling all about In Our Names Network and also being one of the founding members. The network for us at My Sister's House and being a coalition partner with In Our Names Network is critical because too often when we talk about police violence, we only hear about cis Black men. But what about the Black women like Sandra Bland, Atiana Jefferson? But then we go a little further and we talk about, what about Tony McDade, a Black trans man shot and killed in Florida? What about Layleen Polanco, who died in Rikers Island in solitary confinement? In Our Names exists to say that we will not be erased. We organize to uplift those names. We tell those stories. We support the families of those individuals. And we also work to change the systems that killed them.
Thank you so much for to Andrea and Kayla for those really in-depth explainers. Now, coming to this moment, what is the context of police violence against Black women in this current climate?
I mean, there's so many ways it's happening. I know Sydney's been researching this, so I do want to tap to her in a second, but I think that in this moment, it's really important to remember that all the ways that it's been happening continue to happen, right? And so on the street, in cars, in traffic stops, and also when people call for help. So what's often invisible about police violence against Black women, girls, and trans people is it often happens in private spaces where people don't have cameras out, are not cop watching. It's during the vice raid. It's during the domestic violence call. It's during the call for help. It's when Kiwi Herring, a Black trans woman in St. Louis, called for help because she was experiencing homophobic and transphobic violence from her neighbor downstairs who set fire to her porch. She calls the cops, she gets killed, right? That's where it's happening. So it's happening both in full public view in the same ways that it's happening to Black men and particularly cis straight men, but also in private view and also in hospital rooms, in welfare offices, in many other places. And I would say in this moment, the ways in which law enforcement is ramping up are also spaces that directly target Black women, right? That this whole sort of justification for the occupation of cities is about the drug war. Black women are primary targets, and trans people are primary targets of the drug war. They're the fastest growing prison populations because of the drug war. So if the current administration says we're going to ramp up drug enforcement, it's going to be Black women, queer and trans people and queer and trans people of color and women of color who are going to be primary targets. That's also going to intersect with immigration enforcement. There are so many Black migrants who are being targeted in this moment, who are Black women, girls, and trans people who are not being lifted up in the conversation about immigration enforcement, even as they are fighting it for their families and other communities. The same with raids of encampments of unhoused people. Black women, and I'm going to turn to you, Sydney, and also Kayla, because this data is true for Black cis women, trans women, heterosexual, and queer, are the lowest income population, the poorest populations, along with Native women in the United States. So when there's a question of eviction, there's police violence happening there. And then when people become unhoused and the encampments are razed, the people who are being targeted are Black women, queer, and trans people. And then as supports for mental health that were already ramshackle and insufficient are being slashed as the government kind of blows up the healthcare system in order to fund genocide in Israel or fund war on our streets. They are doing that at the expense of mental health needs of our communities. And then when those health needs aren't met, the response is police, the response is jail, the response is police killings, like in the case of Sonya Massey, and then the response increasingly is lock people up in psychiatric facilities. So those are the ways in which policing is intensifying that all have squarely in their sights Black women, queer, and trans people. But I know that my sisters have the data, they have the stories to confirm that or expand on that.
Kayla, do you want to go?
No, you can.
Okay.
You can, yeah.
Sorry, I was having a trouble unmuting. That was my issue on my end. Thank you so much for that, Andrea. And I think everything you said is so true, and it's what we have been seeing and the research that we have been doing at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. In 2021, we started a study. Sorry. So we did a study in sorry, I had someone coming into my office. My apologies, everyone.
It's that time right now. We're busy. Yes.
Right. So, sorry, we started a study in 2022 that ran from 2023, where we collected surveys from over 100 and nearly 150 Black women, transgender nonconforming folks, to understand what their experiences were with police encounters. And to Kayla's point, the thing that we were trying to understand is, what is it like for women, trans, and gender nonconforming folks to experience police violence? And so much of what we know about police violence is through the eyes and experiences of Black men. The other thing that we wanted people to understand and consider is not just police violence that results in a fatality, which is so much of what we hear about in the media, but also the ways in which everyday encounters, the ones that we take for granted, the ones that people have all of the time, are causing harm. And so through this study, we wanted to understand the context of their encounters, the kinds of harms and adverse consequences of their encounters with police, and most importantly, how Black women, trans and gender nonconforming folks envision public safety, which is so different than what policing offers us today. And so, like what Andrea was saying, many of the people in our study had experienced traffic stops. 65% of them had. 57% had experienced street stops and felt like they were not treated fairly, right? And that's not surprising. That's very normal. I think one of the things that stood out to me is the harm that people experienced during encounters where they were seeking assistance from police, as Andrea mentioned, people who are calling for intimate partner violence or because there is an emergency that they're witnessing and police come, and as a result, they or others who are involved experience harm. Often that harm shows up in the form of psychological violence. There's also physical force with or without a weapon. And there's sexual harassment and contact, which In Our Names Network did a participatory action research study of, involving young people and their experiences with school resource officers. So the kind of violence that Black women, trans and gender nonconforming people experience every day in the kinds of encounters that we take for granted, it's very frequent. People are losing their jobs, they are losing things like insurance, they're losing their housing, they're experiencing arrests, they're becoming involved with ICE, their CPS involvement. These are all of the collateral consequences that happen for Black women, trans and gender nonconforming people who have interactions and come in contact with the police. So it's not just a fatality when we're thinking about harm that needs to be top of mind. It needs to be all of the adverse consequences and the mental health. And we also found in our study that there are physical consequences too. We can't show a causal relationship, but there are correlations between the number of encounters a person has had with police and the likelihood that they would report having a physical condition such as asthma, headaches. And we had folks in our study report that they were scared to leave their house as a result of their interactions with police. So the consequences are really very serious, and we need to be thinking about the full range of harm that people encounter and not just the worst harm, which is often how we frame and understand police violence.
Yeah, I just want to add, that was like, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Dr. Sydney. I just wanted to add that everything that you said is like, it's very factual. It brings up a lot of memories for me personally, because it affects trans women like me, especially when we're experiencing homelessness, mental health struggles, trying to survive sex work. I mean, we've seen trans people being arrested while being attacked, misgendered in reports. They've been treated like suspects even when they're the ones asking for help. And I just want to name that when we talk about Black lives, we have to mean all Black lives, including those who are trans, poor, disabled, undocumented, because if we're not naming that, then we're leaving people behind. So I really appreciate your comments on this question.
I appreciate all of your thoughts on this question as well. Now, Andrea, you had mentioned this briefly, and so I want to circle back a little bit to it. In the face of the threat of military takeover of several cities, there has been increased conversation about alternatives to policing. We know that in a number of cases of police violence against Black women, including Sonya Massey's, where police are responding to actual or perceived mental health crises. Can you talk about these interactions, how they've led repeatedly to tragedies? You mentioned that briefly, but I'd love to know more about, the alternatives to policing and the opportunities that we have as communities to pursue that.
I mean, I'll just say that, you know, when we were forming the In Our Names network and thinking about, I mean, at first we were sort of just trying to amplify demands, calls to action around Sandra Bland, around Dejaria Becton, around like all the names that did start to surface. I mean, we have been telling each other these names and telling each other these stories in the way that Kayla was just sharing with us. And we have been coming out to defend each other and support each other through instances of police violence against Black women, girls, and trans people since time, right? Since slave patrols started hemming us up, right? Like, or Indian patrols. I see people in the chat talking about this is an issue that affects Indigenous people and Indigenous women, queer, trans, and two-spirit people, and it absolutely does, and we absolutely need to be paying attention to that. But we have been telling these stories. But when finally in sort of 2014, 2015, that conversation kind of surfaced above water into the public conversation, we first were just trying to support on individual cases and amplify those and network and amplify each other's demands. But then we were like, we can't keep protesting, demanding justice for Kiwi Herring, justice for Sandra Bland, justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for Dejaria Becton, justice for the assault at Spring Valley High, justice for, like, I mean, all these groups came together and we're like, we do still need to fight for justice in these individual cases, but we need to stop it at the source. And the places where we found the most police killings, this is consistent across genders, but particularly for Black women and girls and trans people, is in the context of an actual or perceived mental health crisis, including when someone calls for help and the cops assume that the person is having a mental health crisis, when in fact, like Sonya Massey, they're terrified because they think someone's breaking into their house. And when they don't get the response that they think they should get, they might get upset. And then that is read as a mental health crisis because Black women are framed by society as inherently kind of deranged. If we're not performing mammy and yes, ma'am, no, sir, yes, please, you know, and keeping it down and tamped down, then we're framed as an inherent threat. You see that in Sandra Bland's case. She just said, why can't I smoke in my own car? And is dead for saying, why can't I smoke in my own car? You know, and Sonya Massey called for help because she was scared. Her mom said, please send someone to help her, but don't send someone who's going to interpret her fear or her anger or whatever's going on for her in a way that is what her mom said was prejudice, but, you know, is understanding Black women as kind of inherently deranged, inherently, you know, likely to pop off or be violent. And, you know, Black women experience the most killings of any demographic group by police when unarmed, including of Black men. So there's so many ways in which Black women in some kind of crisis, unarmed, are killed more often than anybody else because of these perceptions of inherent kind of mental illness, derangement, et cetera. So I say that because our primary campaign, one of our primary campaigns then became about how do we build a response to people in crisis that does not involve the police? Because it's not going to go well, like Kayla said. Even if there's not a death, like Sydney and Kayla said, it's not going to solve the problem. And so how do we build that? And that has been in one of our campaigns since the get. We have members at organizations like Mental Health First in Sacramento who have been building that out on the ground. We have groups like Kayla's who are building that out in terms of housing and safety. And we have groups across the country that have been trying to build coordinated crisis response teams that are not police involved. And so we had a learning space for a couple of years. People were like practicing and learning how to do that. And then we also have been inviting people to kind of map out, like, what does an ecosystem of care look like? And if we are centering the experiences of Black women who use drugs or are perceived as using drugs or policed as using drugs, what does a Black feminist vision of a world beyond the drug war look like? And so those are some of the ways in which we've been trying to envision a world where we don't respond to crisis, mental health, drug use, being unhoused, allegations of, you know, shoplifting and other poverty-related expenses with policing and violence, that we respond to those with, you know, from a place of collective and community care and resourcing people with a whole ecosystem that might meet their needs. So those are some of the ways in which In Our Names has been trying to support groups on the ground, like Kayla's, in doing and building that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. I first want to say Sonya Massey should still be here. She was in crisis. She needed help. Instead, she was met with force and violence. They brought guns, they brought aggression, and that's not help, that's harm. And for Black folks, especially Black women, it's often deadly. I see it happen here in Memphis. I've seen the police laugh in our faces when we try to explain what's really going on. I've seen people criminalized for just being vulnerable and sharing their truths and what happened in the situations. And um, for instance, a young woman was stabbed during the course of doing sex work, and she explained to the officers that she was doing sex work. And instead of the person who stabbed her being criminalized, she was criminalized for the sex work act. Even though the person who stabbed her turned themselves in because they were having a mental health episode, but they were also like this military vet who had all these honors and prestige, and privilege that allowed for him to not be prosecuted, but they prosecuted the trans woman. At my sister's house, we try to create support systems that don't rely on police. We have had instances of folks having mental health issues or episodes, and we try to work with systems that we are familiar with, that we have MOUs with, where we don't have to call the police for mobile crisis because they're going to send police officers with guns and aggression. We do safety planning with folks. We do peer response. We also work with our neighbors. When we're building houses, we're in the community, we're providing food, meals, resources, so that they're familiar with the organization, they're familiar with myself. And once the residents take ownership of these homes, they're more likely to communicate and share information with their neighbors versus how it started, where people were kind of a little offset because these big brand new, well, not big brand new houses, but these brand new houses are being, constructed, and they're asking about, renting them, and they're not being able to access them. So there was a little tension initially, which is why we intentionally started to reach out to folks in the community, people who came to our Hot Meal Fridays, and inquired about housing. Like, hey, yeah, you actually can apply to this housing project. And I think community-based solutions look like us being able to commune together, and I think that's what keeps us safe in our little bubble inside of Memphis, Tennessee. But yeah, I'll pass it to you, Dr. McKinney.
Everything that the both of you shared came out in the study that we did. Folks, what does public safety look like to you, right? Folks asked for and said that they wanted public safety that was community led, and that they felt like greater investment in our communities is central to being able to achieve safety for everyone. Mm-hmm. And just listening to you, Kayla, I think that that's so important and so evident in the work that you're doing. This question makes me think about these two different people who were in our study. And one person said, I don't want to call the police for any reason, but I have a brother who has mental health concerns. And, despite my, understanding of what can happen, sometimes this is what feels like the only option available to me. And I'm scared because I'm scared of what can happen to him and what can happen to us in an emergency like this. And, so she's trying to avoid police as much as possible and only have contact in these moments of emergency. And then we have folks who are saying things like, I'm avoiding, I don't want to be involved in anyone else's issues, right? Like if I see something happening, I'm looking the other way because I don't want to be a bystander. I don't want to get caught up when and if the police are called and to be pulled into that potential harm. And I just think about the ways in which police presence is eroding community. Like people are not feeling like they can show up for each other in times of crisis or in times of when violence is happening because they don't want to get caught up. They don't want to get harmed. because they've had their own experiences or they've seen what can happen to other people. And so we have a lot of folks who have had a vicarious encounters with police where maybe they weren't the person directly impacted, but they saw what happened to their friend, their sister, their mother, their brother, and that has caused some fear and trepidation in them about contacting police. And then we have this woman who says in this study, I was walking down the street and I saw this car following this woman, and I decided to walk with her to her destination so she would be safe. And that is what safety is, right? Us showing up for each other, us building community, right? Listening, Kayla, you're talking to the neighbors when you're building homes so that there is a sense of community when folks move in and they're not the outsider, right? That we are building community is at the foundation of safety. And policing, as we understand it today and what it is eroding community. Even for folks who want to show up for others, they're scared because of the potential consequences for themselves, their loved ones, and just individuals around them.
It's so true. And I think I'm seeing in the chat sort of, first of all, thank you, Risa, sharing resources in the chat, both in terms of framing the problems that we were talking about earlier, including the sort of manufactured thing about shoplifting when people are just taking what they need because they have no other way of doing it, and then how Black women are experiencing violence that way as well, but also about the solutions that people are creating in terms of the mapping your ecosystems of care, in terms of building community crisis response programs, in terms of showing up for each other and showing up for the very real impacts of the kind of police violence people experience, which also causes mental health issues, as Sydney was talking about it. So I want to pick up, people say, like, how do we respond to DV? 3/4 of people never tell anyone about domestic violence, and certainly not the cops, because they know they're either not going to help, they're going to make the situation worse. They come with 3 tools: handcuffs, guns, and arrest. And that's 3 very blunt instruments for a very complex issue and problem. And most people call a friend or a neighbor or a relative or a community member before they call the cops. So we need to equip people to be able to respond in those situations. There's programs like in Seattle, there's one called Natural Helper, where they just train people who are experiencing domestic violence are most likely to come to. Your neighbor. My neighbor, I was hearing stuff. I was like, well, I know that calling the cops is not the answer. She told me calling the cops was not what she wanted because she was undocumented. And she also said it just makes it worse. Whenever they come, I just get a worse looking after. So I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? And we came up with some strategies that were not, any of those, but were about supporting her. But like having training to be able to offer solutions or ideas or, thoughts to strategize together was really important. So I would say for domestic violence that we need to kind of skill ourselves up to be able to respond to folks in community. I think I just want to also respond to Hope 66 because I really feel like, someone also mentioned that 988 leads people to cops. And so when you call 988 for mental health crisis, the cops show up. And so we have to find other crisis lines that don't do that. So Black Line is one that someone mentioned. Trans Lifeline is another one that people can call and know they're not going to get the cops when they call for help if they're in crisis. But I do also want to speak to what Hope 66 is saying is, there comes a point where you're so policing your own behavior to avoid attracting police attention that it's turning inwards on you, and it is making you sort of have to find a place to put that rage, and it goes inside and it has really deep mental health impacts. The pressure to not be perceived as a threat, to turn impulse, lash out inward, and then it becomes self-harm. And so then you also feel like you're shrinking yourself in order to survive, and you're not getting the support. And so we just want to name that the In Our Names network is also wanting to create healing spaces for survivors in to recognize that it's not just about, we have to fight for the cases, we have to change the conditions, we have to do the research, we have to mount the campaigns. We also have to create healing activations and portals for survivors who are experiencing these kinds of things on a daily basis, the kinds of impacts that Sydney was talking about. And that also, you know, we have resources to support survivors of police violence who are Black women, girls, and trans people, because many of the organizing groups that do this work do not focus on women who experience police violence or family members of women who are killed. So there'll be a million people sort of coming out to support the family members of a Black man who's cis and heterosexual who was killed. Not a million, not enough. And those families deserve all the support. But when it comes to families of women or trans people who are killed, they're not getting the same support. So we're trying to offer some step in for that kind of support.
Mm-hmm. And might I say that In Our Names Network does a really good job at that. As a member, I've seen how fast the rapid response happens for those people who are survivors and also their family who are survivors of the situations that they face involving police violence.
So true. And I think the other thing that is so important about the support, I think you mentioned this, Andrea, that there is financial support that In Our Names offers. So windows that are broken because of police violence, doors that are broken, beds, right? We are helping to support families and just reconstruct their lives, and even what feels like some of the smallest ways that are so important for reestablishing some stability. I think it's such an important way that the In Our Names network supports survivors of police violence. I also just wanted to say your point, Andrea, about the mental health consequences of contact with police are so true, and we found in our study that there is a positive correlation, which means that as the number of times you encounter police increases, so does your PTSD risk, your scores on PTSD scales, as well as psychological distress, right? So people are having very significant mental health concerns as a result of their interactions with police. And like you said, they're internalizing it and not getting access to the kinds of services that are necessary. And we have a mental health system that does not look like us, which makes it even more difficult for us to get the kind of support that we need when we're having a mental health crisis, and when that is related to police violence.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what was mentioned around the Survivors Fund. As a person who is a survivor of domestic violence, when I went to local organizations that were city or county funded that help people in those situations, I was like pressured into pressing charges against my abuser, something that I really didn't believe in, a process that I really didn't want to have to go through. But I also knew that I needed to get my front door fixed or my landlord was going to kick me out. So it's like it puts us in a really hard position. But within Our Names network, there's no pressure around like being public about the situation. There's no pressure around actually being an active participant in the criminal proceedings and whatever situation it is. It's really about support. And that's what kind of like really made me become a member and bring our organization into this, and also like share their support and the resources that are provided to some of our folks in our houses.
I do think this actually has answered a question, one of the questions that we have in the chat, but if there's anything else you would like to add, what is the best way to get DV help? And we're going to welcome in just a moment as well, Tamika Middleton, our managing director, is joining us as well. So I'd love to get her thoughts and input so we can welcome her to the stage.
Hi everyone. I'm so sorry that I'm just able to hop in and hop on stage. I'm so excited to have y'all. And I know Sydney was on here with us last year when we're talking about Sonya Massey alongside Lauren from In Our Names Network, and a couple other folks. And it's just really an honor to have you all on this call at this time. And in particular, as I'm sure that Risa spoke to this earlier, because we were talking about how to ground this conversation in this moment where not only are we thinking about these anniversaries and thinking about all of these folks who have passed, but also thinking about what is to come as fascism progresses, and in this country, in this moment, as not just sort of the push towards increased police violence, but what we're seeing with increased ICE presence, what we're seeing with military occupations of cities, what the impact of that will be, and the ways that across the globe, gender and military occupations, that sort of the way that intersection happens, and the sort of particular kinds of gendered violence that women face at the hands of police and of military. So it just feels so pertinent and so important to have y'all. And so I'm really grateful. And I'm gonna be quiet and pass it back to Risa for the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Tamika, for being here and for hosting it. And I'm sorry, my cat really wants to be part of this conversation. I just want to highlight before we get back into it, what Mary said in the comments about we need a sisters help network and we need to learn what we have locally. Right now, I believe Sarah's dropping in the chat 2 resources that are literally that. One is building coordinated crisis response, lessons learned from our learning space that we had over 2 years of thinking about how to build a sisters help network, literally. So there's information in that report about that. And then learning what we have locally, that's in our mapping community ecosystems of collective care resource, which hopefully Sarah is going to drop instantaneously. There it is, magic. Because these are really how we do that. The only way we're going to be able to survive this is with each other, and by seeing what we have, what we need to build, and how we can build it together in exactly the ways that Kayla did at Miss Sister's house in Memphis, and in the ways that women and queer and trans people are doing that across the country.
Right. Did anyone else want to add anything more on what's the best way to get DV help? I do think there is a lot of validity to reaching into your resources locally and learning who those resources are. And I'm curious if there are any thoughts as well about the validity of reporting or choosing not to report in an official capacity.
Yeah, I'll just say, oh, go ahead, Kayla. You go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, in those situations, it's really hard, especially for a Black trans woman in the situations that I've been in. I've been in 2 domestic violence situations, and neither of those were handled with care or, discretion or any of those things. Like, they were literally like the first incident, they, mocked us. They labeled both of us as male, which created confusion. They transported us to jail in the same car, which was very wild. So for Black trans women, calling the police is like the very last thing on our list of to-dos, because there are so many different ways that what comes out of our mouths can be changed and twisted around and manipulated into becoming criminalized. There are so many different ways that can happen. And it's the same for trans women, trans men, non-binary folks, as well as women. Our words can really be manipulated and twisted, where they want to criminalize not just the person who's the aggressor, but they also want to criminalize the other person of color in the situation, because a lot of these officers hold a lot of personal biases, and they bring those things with them to work, and they show up in these very intense, sensitive situations. And And I'm no professional when it comes to like, helping domestic violence survivors. I'm still in therapy myself. However, I will say that what has helped me is building out a network of folks in my community, a pod, if you will, of folks who I can run to, people who are aware of my situation and they're not judging me, or even if they are judging me, I don't care. I just need people to be aware. And that's what we need. We need to really start talking about the things that are happening inside our homes that don't cause us, that mean us harm. And figuring out what is the solution, how do we get out of this situation, what pieces do I need to put together to make this puzzle whole so that I can move out of this situation. And sometimes that looks like not calling the police. That looks like calling auntie. That looks like calling my neighbor. That looks like calling my brother, my sister, somebody who is going to have a level head of rationale, and it's going to help you navigate through this situation. Because most of the time, when the police come, they're coming to lock somebody up. They're coming to be the aggressor of the aggressor. And it does not work well for any parties involved.
Exactly what I was going to say. So, and more. So thank you, Kayla. I did just want to say that most people don't report, and there's reasons for that. And there's a report from the National Domestic Violence Hotline that Sarah just dropped in the chat that explains why. Like hotline callers saying, I didn't call the police because I didn't want immigration to get involved. I didn't want family police to get involved. I didn't think they could solve the problem. I didn't want to get arrested myself. I'm on probation and parole. I'm trans. I'm queer. And since mandatory arrest policies went into place, the rate of arrest of survivors of domestic violence has gone up because of exactly everything Kayla just described. And so I really feel like sometimes you have to report in order to get immigration status or to get some benefit, but the people have to weigh the benefits against the risks. And what this report from the National Domestic Violence Hotline shows is that most people, when they weigh the benefits against the risk, choose nothing or choose what Kayla just described, finding someone in their network to help. So let's empower and train up and skill up and make ourselves into the network that people need in that situation. And I think if you're limiting your public, presence, or you're in a small neighborhood, getting to know your neighbors, having community building events in the ways that Risa was saying, crafting, knitting, book club, whatever it is y'all do, right? Barbecue, like do it together, or make it known, even if you don't like to be outside, that you're a number people can call to talk, and you will help connect them to resources, even if you aren't going to be public about it. There's so many ways to show up for each other. And right now in this moment, it's more important than ever, because if it wasn't clear before that law enforcement is a source of violence, as these boots are hitting the streets and the tanks and the DEA, and they're literally trying to eliminate trans people from public existence, from being able to exist at all. Same for queer people, same for migrants, same for people with unmet mental health needs, same for unhoused people, same for people who are perceived or framed as drug users. We have to show up for each other, because if they show up, they absolutely are going to make us disappear in one way or another. And so it's really, really important for us to be showing up for each other in these ways right now. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to share those resources and information with y'all.
If it's cool, if y'all don't mind. Oh, sorry, Sydney, go ahead.
No worries. I was just going to add, there is also research evidence that shows that women who do call police, who are experiencing DV, are less likely to call a second time because their first experience is so negative, right? That they are not willing to subject themselves to that interaction again, right? So I think that's another thing for us to just think about and know, is that like, there are folks who will make the call, but they may not make a second call because of how bad their experiences are.
I just wanted to add in here to the last point that Andrea was making around how things will be more clear. The brutality of the system is increasing. I was just on a call with some folks in Chicago today who were saying that they just got word today that some folks got federal agents are snatching up folks in DV court today, including a survivor who was there seeking support. And so if there is no other time for us to be honest about the brutality of the system and the ways in which it does not serve and protect us, it is in this moment. And so on the advocacy side, on the organizing side of this all, reach out to, get connected to folks who are doing transformative justice work, learn how to build transformative justice networks in your communities. Shout out to Shira Hassan and folks who are doing that work across the country and who are training folks up across the country. And also reach out to organizations that are survivor-led, survivor-oriented organizations that are doing support for folks doing domestic violence that are not reliant on the carceral system. And I will say this, I don't know if folks are if y'all are in Wisconsin, shout out to Black and Brown Women Power Collective, who is doing, survivor-led DV organizing work and is navigating the reality of funding being cut to organizations doing domestic violence and survivor-oriented work that will not report directly to the carceral system, right? So they are losing funding for these networks, and at the same time, because of the sort of cuts to DEI programs in grants on the state and federal level across the country, those organizations are also losing funding that way as well. So if you can advocate for an organization that is existing in your state, in your community, that is doing that work and that is losing funding because they are doing work that challenges the notion that we need the police to keep us safe, I would encourage you to show up in support of those organizations in this moment, because if we never needed them before, we need them right now.
Mm-hmm.
1,000%. I just wanted to name that Shira Hassan, who Tamika mentioned, has a help desk for folks who, if you want to call and talk about how to build the Sisters Network, how to build your transformative justice response, how to build responses to DV without involving the police, you can just book an appointment at the help desk and Shira will help you think that through with a wealth of experience and many connections around the country.
Thank you all.
I'm so sorry. Can I just say one more thing? I know I've been talking a lot. The last question was about, would we benefit from women police units like they have in other countries? And this is just, I have to answer this because the answer is abso-fucking-lutely no. And that all the research shows that police officers are equally violent, if not more, particularly when it comes to Black women. Black women police officers are the most violent to Black women. It is tragic. It is heartbreaking. We can unpack that in the sister circle together. But the answer to the question is no. Black cops haven't stopped police from killing Black people. Trans cops will not stop cops from being terrible to trans people, and women will not stop cops from being terrible to women. So I just had to say that on the way out. But we can build systems that will create more safety for all of us without policing.
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, to kind of start closing us out this evening, this has been such a robust conversation. At Women's March, we are constantly talking about building a feminist future. What would it require to build a future where Sonya Massey, Tatiana Jefferson, Sandra Bland, and so many others would still be with us?
I'll go. So a Black feminist future, a Black trans feminist future is a future where people don't have to fight to exist. It's a future where housing is guaranteed. It's a future where mental health care is available and affirming, where calling for help doesn't mean risking your life. It's a future where people like Tony McDade, Layleen Polanco, Roxana Hernandez, Sandra Bland, Sonya Massey, the list goes on, would still be here and alive, living full, beautiful, complicated lives. Because that's what we all deserve. Not complicated lives, but in this moment, our lives are pretty much as complex as they've ever been. So we really have to, like Tamika said, like in this moment, we really have to really think about that. At my sister's house, we're literally putting roofs over people's heads. We're creating safety that doesn't depend on police or prisons. We're building community inside prisons so that when people come out of those prisons, they don't have to not have options, because that recidivism comes from people not having options outside of the carceral system, like these reentry programs that are funded by city, county, and federal dollars. They're mandated to report, infractions that will lend people back to the carceral system so that they can be enslaved again. A feminist future is one that, no one is disposable. We're going to keep doing this work to make it real. Yeah, I think that for me, that's what the future looks like as a Black feminist. Yeah.
Sign me up for Kayla's future, because that's the answer. Go ahead, Sydney.
I was going to say, I don't think I have anything to add to that. To me, that's exactly how I think a Black feminist future is. So thank you.
And I do think that means tracing back the root cause of every case that we learn about back to the root cause. So Sandra Bland, it was a traffic stop. It was her saying, why can't I smoke in my own car? But really, it was a marijuana arrest that made it so that she was held on bond that she couldn't pay and then died in the jail. Breonna Taylor, it was a no-knock warrant, but that wasn't where it stops. It stops at it was the drug war that killed Breonna Taylor. So solutions that are about, let's make sure they have to knock for and wait 30 seconds before they go barging in at 3 a.m, which frankly makes no difference. Like, that's an imperfect solution. Ending the drug war is what would bring a world for Breonna Taylor and for Sandra Bland, and meeting people's basic needs for housing, healthcare, including, as you're saying, affirming mental health care and so on, and eliminating policing and replacing it with care is really the world that we want to build. But we have to, with each incident, kind of go one step further, and the individual officer, the individual department, the individual policy, to like, why were they there in the first place? What is the root that sent them there, and how do we uproot that? And I would say that leads us to criminalization and policing as something we have to uproot in the center of our struggles and replace it with care, because criminalization is the antithesis of care. And as Saidiya Hartman reminds us, care is the antidote to violence.
I'll actually just add, I appreciate that, Andrea. One thing I was thinking is, as you're sharing, we should go back, is we need to be able to be seen as whole people, not through stereotypes, not as angry Black women who are unstable and violent. We need to be able to express our joy, our frustration, our challenges, and not have that be viewed as something that is wrong with us, but just us allowed to be full human beings with a complexity of feelings and emotions. And so often what's happening to the women who are experiencing criminalization, Black women, is they're not viewed as human beings. They're not viewed as people. They're viewed as the stereotypes through which we have understand Black women, and we need to really unpack and come to terms with that and begin to really think of how we respect and value and honor and celebrate Black women, trans and gender nonconforming folks, instead of criminalizing them for just being.
I just want to encourage folks, if you missed the Free America Study session on abolition that featured Andrea, I would encourage you to go back and watch it. It is phenomenal. But one of the things I want to lift up here, one of the things that Andrea talked about in that session, which is, about the political foundation that raised me, about abolition. That is, abolition is both a vision and a strategy, and a political organizing strategy. And so when we talk about abolition, we talk about envisioning a world without prisons, a world without, cages. We also are talking about, we also are proffering an organizing strategy, and it speaks to what Andrea was talking about the root causes, how we offer care, but also when you are in your communities and you are hearing folks talk about how to address the issues that are arising in your communities, and they say, hey, we know how to address the crime problem that's happening here. We can put 500 more cops on the street, right? There is an intervention for you to make there as an organizer, as an advocate, as an activist. When you hear folks say, oh, there's a problem, there's overcrowding in our jails, and people say, we know what to do, we'll build a new one. There is an intervention for you to make there. And so the invitation, if we're talking about how we move towards a feminist future, a Black feminist future, a Black queer trans feminist future, is to think about every time you are offering or you see people offering a solution to a quote unquote problem, make an intervention that gets us closer to the world you are trying to build. Keep our eyes on the world that we are trying to build, the world that Kayla laid out, the world that Sydney laid out, and say, is this intervention, is this quote unquote solution actually bringing us closer, or is it actually putting more people in cages? Is it actually criminalizing more people? Because what we will find is so many of the so-called solutions actually bring us farther and farther away from a world in which we are all living the fullness of our lives, right? It's bringing us closer to a world wherein we are throwing away more and more people, or when we are dehumanizing more and more people. And so if we are to get to a feminist future, we have to be actually really intentional about the solutions that we are offering and we are advocating for in the world. And we have to be very diligent about pushing back against those solutions that actually are not solutions for us, but that are solutions for billionaires, that are solutions for fascists, that are solutions for for folks who would be okay seeing us die. And so that's the invitation towards getting us closer to the feminist future. And I again want to ground us back in the reality of this current moment and the ways in which this president is saying, hey, this city right there, they got a crime problem. And the way to solve that crime problem is more cops on the street, more military on the street. And we see the ways in which they're policing, prisons, concentration camps are wielded as for political ends, are wielded as retaliation for folks who disagree. All of this shit is political, friends. And so we want to be real clear about that. I want to invite folks out next week. Keep posted on our socials and our emails. Next week, we're going to offer you a phenomenal session that's going to talk about this military occupations of these cities. And we'll have, if folks do not know who Dr. Tamara Nopper is, I suggest you get in to that body of work that she is offering, because she will be joining us next week to talk about the politicization of crime data and the ways in which this government has wielded it against folks. And so I just wanted to offer that we have to be really diligent. We've been talking on our staff today about political rigor and political discipline. And we have to be very rigorous in the face of the solutions that people are offering, in the face of the ways people are framing the communities that we live in, the communities we're a part of, the communities that our loved ones are a part of. And we have to be very diligent and disciplined about not letting them dehumanize our folks and our loved ones and our neighbors and our community members.
Thank
you. So we have one last question, and it's been asked in different ways from different people. The first being, how can we help? And a more specific version of this, how can I show up for others if I avoid public presence?
I think the how can we help is answered by, forming a community, joining, well, one, finding out what's already happening in your community, mapping that out, mapping what resources are available, finding organizations that are already doing this work that you can join, transformative justice groups that are already doing this work that you can join. If not, start with your neighbors, start with your apartment building. What I've been hearing in New York and Chicago is that ICE is just showing up in apartment buildings. And so be the person who doesn't let them in, be the person who doesn't answer the door, who yells up the stairs, who reminds people not to open their doors, who, follows people when they're being taken, who answers the call when a person's like, I don't know what to do. I'm experiencing violence in my home and I cannot call any of these systems. Build a community crisis response team. There's resources that you'll get in your email in the chat that invite you into how to start doing that. And I think that there's so many ways to intervene right now. Just think about where you have influence, who listens to you in those conversations that Tamika was talking about, right? When someone says something, you got to speak up. You can't be like, not today. You got to speak up. If you're, at the chiropractor and the chiropractor says, boy, these, boys playing girls sports, I can't with that. No, you got to say that's not a thing. And we're not going to and break it down for them. There's so many ways to intervene in this moment. Just think about where you have influence, where you gather with people, who you are in community with, and figure out what you might be able to do together, using some of the resources or ones in your community.
Ashay. I'm going to go with what Tamika said earlier and add a little bit to that. It's supporting the organizations that are on the ground in your area or not in your area who are doing this specific work around anti-police violence against Black women, trans, and femmes. And also, if you avoid public spaces, in my experience over the past decade or more in advocacy, public health, and organizing, comms is probably where you should be. Because the comms team, they really do rigorous work. They really push the statement, the strategy of the organization really strongly. You've been in the comments the whole time, so I think you maybe should take some comms classes and do some background work for us. Maybe a movement in your area. Volunteering is at the top of the list for me. But I also like to add consistent volunteering. That one and done, it does not work for a lot of organizations. We need people who are consistently dedicated to coming and showing up and consistently doing the thing. And then also just you see a need, fill it. For example, we did a Pride event where we were tabling, and I'm the type of person, I'm anti-paper, killing trees and all that good stuff. So I don't do the pamphlets for our organization and the services that we provide. We have QR codes that people can scan. And this lady who was at a booth, she was volunteering with, I think, Planned Parenthood or something. And she saw that we didn't have pamphlets. So a week later, she just called and was like, hey, I printed up 1,000 pamphlets for your organization. Would you like me to bring them to you? So it's just you see a need, feel that need. And there are plenty in this moment, there are plenty of needs for many organizations that are supporting this kind of work. So you just have to really do your research, figure out where you fit. If that's making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if that's bringing milk to the protests and rallies because you know that there's going to be a heavy police presence, if that's putting your body in front of a Black or brown body, you just have to figure out where you belong in this space, because you do. This is a human rights issue, and as long as you got blood in your veins, I think you're a human. So yeah, you have to figure out where you belong in it, but you definitely do.
I think the only thing I'll add is I've been thinking a lot about my own values and organizational values, and I think this is the moment to get clear on what your values are and to move in alignment with those values. So whatever it is that brought you to this conversation tonight to be part of the Women's March Network, those are the things that you need to get clear on and make sure that when you're in community, you're moving in alignment with those, because those are the things that are going to help you show up for folks when you are seeing they are in need, whether it's police or they're facing some other crisis, right? Those are the things that are going to keep us grounded and focused in a time like now where it's kind of crazy. There's a lot of happening, and there is a lot of fear about, like, do I show up or not? How do I show up? And I'd say this is just get clear on your values, and if you do that, you will be able to navigate all of the noise and all of the chaos and all of the fear that is characterizing the moment that we live in.
Mhm.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. And, to the comments, there is a degree of legwork to this. What is available in your locality is going to be different. What's available to me here in LA County in Southern California is going to be very different from what's available in Atlanta. And when we're talking about working locally, that means we're going to have to, put in the work to find out what is local to us. And so we encourage you to just give it a search. Do a quick Google search for what's around you. Talk to people in your networks. Find out if there are people who know people who know people. This is part of the research that we are responsible for when we are getting involved ourselves. And so we encourage everyone to reach into their local community networks. Go yell at your city council members, your school boards, be advocates at your local level, and continue to be advocates here with us. So to that end, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. Like the scroll says, all links and resources are going to be sent via email to everyone who registered for the call. Stay in touch. Keep an eye on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, where else are we? Blue Sky. We are everywhere as Women's March, and we have a great session for you next week as well. Thank you for joining us again, and make sure you're inviting others. Keep an eye out, and we can't wait to see you next week. Good night, everyone, and thank you to our guests.
Yeah.